Our friends, you know that the United States of America is the world's largest economy and China is the second largest economy. But China is creating, China is manufacturing, and China is selling more than the United States of America. China is producing more than any other country in the world, and China's market is bigger than the economies, other large economies in the world. As a result, there might be a crisis in China, and next global economic crisis could be made in China because of its overcapacity. You know, China's capacity, every country has a particular capacity, and within the limit of a state's capacity, one should produce and one should do its works. But the Chinese economy or the Chinese leaders in working at such a speed so that it can reach and overcome the US economy at the earliest. On the one hand, Donald Trump is thinking that he will become the most powerful country in the world. On the other hand, Xi Jinping is thinking that he will overcome the United States of America. Within this tussle, the global economy has been suffering. How the United States of American economy and the global economy is being suffered by the US-Israel-led war in Iran, that has been explained by hundreds of social scientists and political experts so far. But the recent crisis in China has very little been discussed in the public forum. Okay, that is why it seems that it is necessary to discuss about how Chinese economy or how China's overcapacity can create an economic disaster in the world. You know, there has been no shortage of complaints about Chinese overcapacity in recent years. Beijing's commitment to driving exports and widening its trade surplus by any means necessary has undermined the manufacturing aspirations of advanced economies such as the United States and those in Europe, as well as developing countries in African, Asian, and Latin America. There is more of a global consensus about the nature of the challenge than ever before, but it has had little effect on Chinese policy. How the problem is morphing into a qualitatively new and more dangerous one, the world's ability to absorb Chinese overcapacity is approaching a breakthrough point, you know, and if that breaking point comes, the consequences could be a global economic crisis at a time when governments are particularly ill equipped to manage the fallout. Over the past 2 decades, China has established the largest trade surplus in recorded history. You see the Chinese economy, how China is trying to overcome the US, because in the United States of America there has been created a problem due to the faulty policies of Mr. Donald Trump. In his second term, Donald Trump has initiated not less than 144 decrees or presidential orders. So can you imagine? And he imposed tariffs haphazardly on any country, on every country. Okay, so over the past 2 decades, China has established a, the largest trade surplus in recorded history. In 2025, it reached nearly $1.2 trillion. Can you just imagine how its economy reached, how its trade surplus reached, growing at 3 times the rate of global goods trade. So this paradigm has been strategically beneficial for China and definite and deflationary for the rest of the world in the short run. But it is politically and structurally unsustainable, creating an increasing and an under appreciated risk in the entire global economy. China's remarkable path of economic development over the last several decades has been made possible by a benign international environment in which other countries were eager to accept low cost manufactured goods in exchange for efficient supply chains and consumer welfare. China is famous in the world for its low cost goods and it is spreading across the world. In every corner of the world, you will find Chinese goods, whereas you will not find the American goods or European goods are being produced in Europe and American markets. Okay, so but the international environment has turned toxic. The political appetite for accepting the deindustrialization and critical dependencies that come with the flood of Chinese imports in finite and shrinking. As these trends continue, protectionism is likely to rise, cutting off Chinese manufacturers' market access and thereby short circuiting Beijing's strategy, introduced in 2020 of dual circulation, which promotes both domestic economic self sufficiency and continued engagement in international markets. But the problem goes well beyond the political backlash. It is a problem of arithmetic. When the Chinese economy was subsequently smaller, a strategy based on driving export growth at 2 or 3 times the rate of overall global economic growth was possible because there was sufficient global demand to absorb the exports. Today, however, China has a much larger economy and cannot continue on this trajectory without eventually running out of customers. Put simply, Beijing has outgrown its economic model. When the Chinese export machine stalls, the reckoning will be most painful for China. But a material slowdown in its economy would send shockwaves around the world, especially among China's major trading partners, not only in the Asia Pacific but also in countries elsewhere. Those countries and those economies have become intertwined with China's. The United States would not be immune of the shock, but it would be the only actor with the economic and institutional capacity to stabilize the global economy. The surest way to avoid this costly chain of events is a preemptive and gradual rebalancing of the Chinese economy. This has long been China's best path towards more sustainable growth and the route the United States has advocated for years. But whereas in decades past it was a smart choice, not it is a necessary, now it is a necessary absolute disadvantage. China now accounts for roughly 30% of global industrial production. You just imagine one country is producing about 30% of the global economy, and by 2030 it is expected to reach 45%, according to a 2024 UN report. With the exception of the US economy immediately after World War II, there is no historical precedent for such a concentration of industrial power. Measured as a share of global GDP, China's current manufactured goods surplus is greater than the combined surpluses of Germany and Japan at any point during the 1980s. These manufacturing surplus reflects a concerned policy choice. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development has estimated that 60% of China's gains in global manufacturing market share have been driven by governmental subsidies. Perhaps the most significant, if implicit, subsidy is Chinese manufacturing firms' access to Beijing's state-directed financial system, which channels vast credit to prioritized sectors, enabling Chinese firms to expand without the same concern for profit and return as their international peers. India cannot take such kind of subsidiary policies for improving its production and manufacturing because it has democratic norms, because the opposition is very strong here in India, and they might create some challenges and pose instability for the government. Okay, so the result of a self-defeating race to the bottom, in which firms cut prices below cost, accept razor thin or negative margins, and continue building to chase greater market share. Nearly 30% of Chinese industrial firms operate at a loss, up from 20% before the COVID-19 pandemic. In sectors with the fastest investment growth, largely those prioritized under Chinese leader Xi Jinping's Made in China 2025 initiative, which seeks to foster Chinese self-sufficiency in advanced industries. The number is as high as 34%. Rather than allowing falling firms to exit, local governments prop up unprofitable companies to preserve employment and tax revenue. What is the consequence? As a result, local governments prop up unprofitable companies to preserve complement and tax revenue, and state-owned banks roll over debt of insolvent borrowers. You just think how China is producing and manufacturing at such a large quantity. This system is, in addition to a persistently undervalued renminbi that makes export cheap, allows Chinese firms to charge up, and 30% less than their peers based elsewhere. How the strategy has been taken by Chinese government to spread in every corner of the world. So these price wars and overcapacity have negative effects not only abroad but also at home. The Chinese word for this phenomenon is Neijuan, translated as involution, a term used to refer to excessive competition that pushes Chinese companies to the brink for over diminishing returns. Firms invest more to produce more, to export more at lower or negative margins, subsidized by local governments whose own fiscal health depends on the factors staying open. The result is an industrial machine that cannot stop and cannot slow down, but that, owing to the limits of demand, cannot keep going. A crisis is not inevitable. China's economy is resilient, and at least on paper, its leadership has signaled a recognition of the problem and an interest is taking steps to address it. The Chinese Communist Party adopted an anti-involution campaign in 2025, and the 15th five-year plan for 2026 to 2030 promotes consumption, particularly in rural areas. The CCP has also taken modest steps to strengthen its social safety net with the goal of reducing the incentive for households to save instead of spend. But China's leadership remains unwilling to make the most important change, fundamentally reorienting the country's growth strategy toward a more sustainable model. Beijing has, in general, continued to suppress domestic consumption with the goal of maximizing industrial output in strategic and lower value sectors alike. The result is what the economist Yesheng Huang calls an absolute advantage economy. You see, a country that competes simultaneously with the United States when it comes to artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, and electronics, and with the poorest nations in Africa when it comes to the manufacturing of textiles, apparel, and the household baubles. This defies an industrial or historical precedent, not to mention the basic economic logic of comparative advantage that most other countries follow. Even governments that pursued mercantilist development strategies, such as those in South Korea and Taiwan, relinquished low value added manufacturing as domestic wages rose. So Beijing is reluctant to change course because its export led growth model is both an economic grand strategy and a political project. Dual circulation plays to China's advantages in scale manufacturing, energy, infrastructure, labor, and engineering expertise. It also reflects Xi's deeply rooted belief, as reflected in a 2020 speech, that although China must accelerate construction of the digital economy, the real economy is the foundation, and the various manufacturing industries cannot be abandoned. As the economist Zhongwan Liu has written in these pages, as the party sees it, consumption is an individualistic distraction that threatens to divert resources away from China's core economic strength, its industrial base. So this is the situation of China, how China is aggressively manufacturing to send their goods in the world. Might be they are incurring losses, but still to compete with the United States of America and European markets, it continues to manufacture and manufacture, supply and supply, earn and earn, and grow more and more, so that it can overtake the United States of America within a decade. Within these words, I would like to conclude here. Maybe in the next video, I will come like such videos with you. Thank you very much for watching this video.